In a city where the powerful turn a blind eye to the forgotten, one homeless man's life is about to change forever. But how? What fate awaits him around the corner? Stay with us to find out. Before we dive in, drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from. We'd love to know. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more powerful stories. The towering skyscrapers of the city cast long shadows over the forgotten streets below, where 52-year-old Michael Harper moved through the morning haze, just another invisible figure among the ruins of his former life. Once a skilled carpenter, a proud husband, and a devoted father, Michael now called the cracked pavement his home, his world reduced to a battered tent and the cold concrete. The city around him pulsed with life, but for Michael, each day felt like a cruel reminder of everything he had lost. The morning air was sharp as he stirred from his restless sleep. He pulled the frayed blanket tighter around his body, trying to block out the chill that settled deep in his bones. Through the thin fabric of his tent, the sounds of the waking city filtered in. Honking horns, the distant roar of the subway, and the hurried steps of commuters with places to be. Michael forced himself to sit up, his joints aching from another night on the hard ground. His dark skin was marked with deep lines of sorrow and hardship, and his salt and pepper beard was unkempt, tangled from weeks without a mirror or proper wash. Michael moved through his morning ritual, packing up his few belongings before the local beat cop arrived to clear the area. Each item he touched carried a weight of its own: his tattered blanket, a battered notebook, and a worn photograph of the family he had lost. Every morning felt the same, an endless cycle of survival with no hope in sight. As he moved through the streets, memories of a life once filled with love and purpose flooded his mind. He could almost hear the laughter of his children, Victor and Leona, playing in the backyard, and smell the aroma of Anna's cooking filling their modest home. But that life was gone, shattered in a single night of unimaginable tragedy. It had been a crisp autumn evening when Michael's world crumbled. After finishing a long shift at the construction site, he had looked forward to a quiet night with his family, maybe watching a movie or helping the kids with homework. But fate had other plans. Just as he pulled into the driveway, his phone rang. Anna's voice trembled on the other end as she told him there had been an accident. Victor and Leona were being rushed to the hospital. Michael's heart pounded as he raced to the emergency room, fear gripping his chest. The hours that followed were a blur of sterile white corridors, the overwhelming stench of antiseptic, and the grim faces of doctors delivering the worst news imaginable. By morning, his world was irrevocably changed. Anna and the children were gone, killed by a drunk driver who had run a red light. Michael, who hadn't been in the car, was left alone to face a world that no longer made sense. The weeks and months that followed were a haze of grief and pain. Michael buried himself in work, desperately trying to outrun the emptiness that consumed him. But the weight of his loss proved too great. A severe back injury on the job left him unable to work, and with that, the final thread holding his life together snapped. Alcohol became his escape, a way to numb the pain that never left him. Soon, his savings vanished, his home was lost, and eviction notices piled up until one cold morning, Michael found himself on the street with nothing but a duffel bag of clothes. The transition to homelessness was brutal and swift. The skills that once made him valuable now meant nothing. Every day was a struggle for survival, and the world around him looked at him with suspicion and disdain. He quickly learned the unspoken rules of the streets. where to sleep, where to beg, and which areas to avoid. But nothing could prepare him for the harsh reality of being invisible in a city that never stopped moving. By midday, Michael reached his usual spot near a busy intersection. His cardboard sign, worn and smudged, read, "Hungry and homeless. Any help appreciated. God bless." He sat on the cold pavement, holding the sign against his legs as people rushed by, their eyes carefully avoiding his. Some muttered under their breath, their words carrying thinly veiled racism. "Get a job," sneered one man in a suit, not even slowing down. Michael clenched his jaw, swallowing the bitter retort that burned on his tongue. Fighting back would only make things worse. He had long since learned that no one cared about the reasons he was here. No one saw the man he used to be, the father, the husband, the skilled carpenter. To them, he was just another homeless black man, a problem to be ignored. As the hours dragged by, Michael couldn't help but notice the stark difference in how people treated him compared to the white homeless man a block away. While Michael's cup remained nearly empty, the other man's steadily filled throughout the day. The realization sent a fresh wave of hopelessness through him, a cruel reminder of how deeply racism still ran in this city. Later that afternoon, a group of teenagers approached, their laughter ringing out across the street. Michael's gut tightened as they neared, sensing trouble. One of the boys nudged his friend, grinning. "Watch this," he said loudly, pulling out a $20 bill and waving it in front of Michael's face. For a brief moment, hope flared in Michael's chest, but it was cruelly extinguished when the boy tore the bill in half, letting the pieces flutter to the ground as the group erupted in laughter and walked away. Michael stared at the torn money, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. Another reminder of how invisible he was, how easily people could humiliate him without consequence. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city streets. Michael gathered his meager earnings, barely enough for a meal, and made his way back to the tent that served as his only refuge. The streets transformed in the fading light. The daytime crowd replaced by other homeless individuals, sex workers, and those who thrived in the shadows. Michael sat outside his tent, watching as the city changed, feeling the heavy blanket of despair settle over him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the battered notebook. Inside, a faded photograph of Anna, Victor, and Leona smiled back at him, a frozen memory of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. His fingers traced the edges of the photo as he whispered, "I'm sorry." His voice cracked under the weight of his grief. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry I became this." A single tear slipped down his cheek, landing on the photograph. As night deepened, Michael curled up in his sleeping bag, the sounds of the city fading into the background. But no amount of noise could drown out the relentless drumbeat of his thoughts. He closed his eyes, exhaustion pulling him into a restless sleep filled with dreams of the life he had lost and a future he could no longer imagine. Little did Michael know that the dawn would bring more than just another day of survival. It would bring an encounter that would change everything, setting him on a path he never thought possible, a path toward redemption, hope, and a second chance. But for now, he slept, unaware that fate was already moving. The following evening, Michael Harper found himself once again scavenging behind the busy restaurants in the heart of the city. The air was thick with the aroma of grilled meats and spices, an almost unbearable reminder of the meals he used to share with his family. His stomach growled loudly, a painful echo of his hunger as he sifted through the dumpster, searching for anything that could be salvaged. His fingers closed around a half-eaten burger, still wrapped in its paper. It was cold and unappetizing, but to Michael, it was a small victory. As he prepared to take a bite, a faint sound caught his attention, a soft rustling coming from the alley nearby. Michael froze, his senses immediately on high alert. Life on the streets had taught him that unexpected noises could mean trouble. Another homeless person, a drug addict, or something worse. Caution warred with curiosity until the latter won. Michael crept toward the source of the sound, peering into the dimly lit alley. At first, he saw nothing but scattered trash and empty boxes. Then, he noticed a slight movement in the shadows near a rusted garbage can. Squinting, he made out the shape of an animal, a dog, thin and trembling, partially hidden behind the metal bin. Michael's breath caught in his throat. The animal was in terrible condition, its ribs clearly visible through its matted, filthy fur. One of its legs was held at an awkward angle, likely from an old injury that had never healed. But it was the eyes that struck Michael most, big, dark, and filled with a mix of fear and desperation. Eyes that mirrored his own. For a moment, Michael hesitated. A dog this desperate could be dangerous. But the longer he stood there, the clearer it became that the animal was no threat. It didn't growl or bare its teeth. Instead, it cowered, trying to make itself as small as possible. Michael took a cautious step forward, then another. "Hey there," he called softly, his voice rough from disuse. The dog's ears twitched at the sound, but it didn't move. Slowly, Michael knelt, breaking off a piece of the burger he'd just found. He held it out, his hand trembling slightly. "It's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you. You hungry, boy?" The dog's nose twitched, catching the scent of food. Painfully slow, it inched forward, its body low to the ground. Michael stayed perfectly still, his arm extended, offering the food like a fragile peace treaty. After what felt like an eternity, the dog finally reached him, its cold nose brushing against Michael's fingers. In a flash, it snatched the food and retreated a few steps, devouring the morsel in seconds. Michael watched, his heart twisting in his chest. He broke off another piece of the burger and held it out again. This time the dog didn't hesitate as long. It crept forward and took the food gently from his hand. Encouraged, Michael slowly reached out, placing his hand on the dog's bone head. The animal flinched but didn't pull away. Instead, it leaned into the touch, as starved for affection as it was for food. "You're all alone too, huh?" Michael murmured, his voice softening. "Guess that makes two of us." He scratched behind the dog's ears, feeling the roughness of its fur beneath his fingers. The two of them sat there in the alley for a long time, sharing what little food Michael had. For the first time in years, Michael found himself talking, his words spilling out in a quiet stream. He told the dog about Anna, about Victor and Leona, about the life he had lost, the dreams that had crumbled. The dog listened silently, occasionally thumping its tail or pressing its head into Michael's side. When the food was gone, Michael faced a dilemma. He couldn't just leave the dog here, not in this condition. But what did he have to offer? He could barely take care of himself. Taking on the responsibility of another life seemed foolish, maybe even cruel. Yet, when he stood to leave, the dog struggled to its feet and limped after him, pausing a few feet away, looking up at Michael with those soulful eyes. It was as if the animal was asking for permission to follow. Michael sighed, a mix of resignation and something he hadn't felt in a long time, a faint spark of purpose. "All right," he muttered. "Come on then, but I can't promise you much." The dog's tail wagged weakly, and it fell into step beside Michael as they made their way through the dark city streets. As they walked, Michael found himself talking again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Guess you need a name, huh? Can't just keep calling you Dog." He glanced down at the animal, its form little more than a shadow against the night. "How about Shadow?" he mused. "That work for you?" The dog looked up at him and gave a soft whine, which Michael took as agreement. They reached Michael's tent just as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky. Michael held open the flap of his makeshift home, and Shadow limped inside without hesitation, curling up in the corner as if he'd always belonged there. Michael settled onto his thin sleeping bag, feeling the surprising warmth of Shadow's body against his side. For the first time in years, Michael didn't feel entirely alone. The crushing weight of his grief and despair seemed just a little lighter. "Good night, Shadow," he murmured, resting his hand on the dog's bony back. He drifted off to sleep, a tiny part of him daring to hope that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Neither of them knew then that this unexpected bond was the beginning of a journey neither could have imagined, a journey that would challenge Michael's perception of himself, rekindle his spirit, and ultimately set him on a path toward something he thought was forever lost, redemption and a second chance at life. The days that followed brought a subtle but undeniable shift in Michael Harper's life. For the first time in years, he woke up with a purpose beyond simply surviving another day. Shadow, though still weak and limping, gave Michael a reason to rise with the sun and face the city's cruel streets. The bond between them grew quickly, their shared loneliness forging a connection neither had expected. Each morning, Michael emerged from his tent with Shadow limping faithfully behind him. The dog's body was still frail, his coat matted, but there was a flicker of life in his eyes now. Michael found himself speaking more, explaining their plans for the day as if Shadow could understand every word. "All right, boy," he'd say, scratching behind Shadow's ears. "Let's see what we can find for breakfast." Their daily routine took on a new rhythm. Michael timed their scavenging trips more carefully, learning which dumpsters held the best scraps and when the restaurants tossed their leftovers. He became more mindful of what he found, always checking if it was safe for Shadow to eat. Shadow, in turn, followed closely, never straying far, his eyes constantly searching for Michael's approval. One morning, about a week after Shadow's arrival, Michael struck what felt like gold. Behind a fancy cafe, he found a bag of day-old pastries, croissants, muffins, and even a cinnamon roll. The pastries were slightly stale but perfectly edible. Michael couldn't help but smile as he pulled out a croissant and knelt beside Shadow. "Look at this, Shadow," he chuckled, breaking off a piece. "We're dining like kings today." Shadow eagerly took the treat, his tail wagging weakly. For a brief moment, Michael laughed, a sound so rare it startled him. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt joy, even over something so simple. As the days passed, the change in Michael became noticeable, even to himself. He began to stand a little straighter, his shoulders no longer slumped under the weight of grief. He took more care in his appearance, using public restrooms to wash up and running his fingers through his beard to keep it somewhat tidy. The world still saw him as a homeless man, but inside, something was shifting. Shadow's condition improved slowly. His coat remained dirty and tangled, but his ribs were no longer so pronounced. The limp persisted, but it seemed less painful. Most importantly, his eyes no longer held that empty, haunted look. When he gazed at Michael, it was with trust, and something dangerously close to affection. But the streets remained a harsh place, and Michael knew better than to believe things would stay easy. Racism, always a quiet undercurrent in his daily life, became more pronounced now that Shadow was with him. Some people smiled at the dog, drawn in by his soulful eyes and gentle nature, only to recoil when their gaze shifted to Michael. One afternoon, as they walked through a busy street, a well-dressed woman approached. Her eyes lit up at the sight of Shadow. "Oh, what a sweet dog," she cooed, bending down to pet him. For a fleeting second, Michael allowed himself to believe in a normal interaction. But then the woman looked up, her gaze met Michael's, and her expression shifted instantly. She straightened, her smile vanishing as she clutched her expensive purse tighter. "I hope you're taking good care of it," she snapped, her voice cold and accusatory. Michael forced a polite smile, his jaw tight. "I'm doing my best, ma'am," he replied quietly, fighting to keep his anger in check. The woman's lips curled in disdain. "Maybe you should think about finding him a proper home, someone who can actually care for him." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked away, leaving Michael standing there, his fists clenched at his sides. Shadow pressed against his leg, sensing his tension. Michael took a shaky breath and rested his hand on the dog's head. "It's okay, boy," he whispered. "We've got each other. That's what matters." But the woman's words echoed in his mind long after she was gone. Maybe she was right. What kind of life could he offer Shadow? Still, when he looked down and saw those trusting eyes looking back, Michael knew he couldn't let the dog go. Shadow had no one else. Neither did he. As the weeks went by, Michael noticed a change in the city's atmosphere. There were more police patrols in the wealthier areas, and he overheard snippets of conversations about a string of recent break-ins. The tension in the air was growing, and it made Michael uneasy. One afternoon, as he and Shadow navigated through a more affluent neighborhood, Michael overheard a group of well-dressed people speaking in hushed tones. "Another break-in last night," one of them whispered. "It's getting worse. We need to increase security." Michael quickened his pace, pulling Shadow along. He knew all too well that when the rich felt threatened, it was always people like him who paid the price. They became targets, scapegoats for crimes they had nothing to do with. As they turned a corner, Michael nearly collided with a police officer. The man's hand went instantly to his weapon, his eyes narrowing as he took in Michael's appearance. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" the officer demanded, his tone hard. Michael's heart raced, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Just passing through, sir," he answered, keeping his voice even. "Me and my dog, we don't want no trouble." The officer's eyes flicked to Shadow, who pressed protectively against Michael's leg, his ears back. For a moment, something softened in the officer's gaze, but it vanished quickly. "Make sure you keep moving," he ordered. "This isn't a good place for you to be hanging around." "Yes, sir," Michael nodded quickly. "Thank you, sir." He tugged gently on Shadow's leash and hurried away, his heart pounding in his chest. That night, back at the tent, Michael held Shadow close, drawing comfort from the dog's steady presence. "We've got to be careful, boy," he murmured. "Things are changing out there, and not for the better." His words hung heavy in the air. The city was changing, and Michael could feel it in his bones. He didn't know what was coming, but he knew one thing for certain. He and Shadow would face it together. What Michael didn't know was just how prophetic his words would prove to be. Somewhere, events were already unfolding that would soon collide with his world in ways he could never have imagined. The day that would change everything started like any other. Michael Harper woke early, the first light of dawn barely visible through the worn fabric of his tent. Shadow stirred beside him, tail thumping softly against the ground in greeting. Despite the weight of his recent worries, Michael couldn't help but smile at the dog's unwavering affection. "Morning, boy," he murmured, running a hand through Shadow's matted fur. "Let's see what trouble the world's got for us today." They stepped out into the crisp morning air, the city just beginning to wake. The usual symphony of traffic, distant sirens, and hurried footsteps was still muted, the streets not yet consumed by the daily rush. Michael took a moment to stretch, his joints stiff and sore from another night on the cold ground. Shadow mimicked him, extending his front legs in a long, luxurious stretch that made Michael chuckle despite himself. They set off on their usual route, checking behind restaurants and cafes for discarded food. Michael's mind drifted as they walked, still troubled by the growing tension he had sensed in the city. He kept hearing murmurs of crime, of break-ins plaguing the richer neighborhoods. The increased police presence, the wary glances from strangers. It all added up to a dangerous shift in the air. Lost in thought, Michael almost didn't notice the change in the atmosphere around him. It was Shadow who alerted him first, the dog's ears perked up, his body stiffening. Michael followed Shadow's gaze and saw it too. People on the sidewalk had stopped, turning to look at something approaching. A sleek black Mercedes sedan, followed by another identical car, was gliding slowly down the street. Their polished surfaces gleamed under the morning sun, an unmistakable symbol of wealth and power. They looked out of place in this run-down part of the city, and the way the crowd reacted only confirmed Michael's growing unease. The cars slowed as they neared, their windows tinted too dark to see inside. Michael instinctively placed a hand on Shadow's head, his own tension rising. "Easy, boy," he whispered, feeling the prickle of instinct warning him to run. To his surprise, the lead car came to a stop directly in front of him. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. Michael held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. Then the rear door of the first Mercedes opened and a man stepped out. Everything about the man screamed money. His tailored suit fit him perfectly, his salt and pepper hair styled immaculately. Even his shoes shone with a mirror-like polish. The way he carried himself left no doubt this was someone used to being in control. As the man straightened his jacket, Michael caught a glimpse of movement in the car behind him, but his attention was quickly pulled back. Another man emerged from the driver's side, tall and broad-shouldered, with the unmistakable bearing of someone trained for violence. His cold eyes swept the area, settling on Michael and Shadow. Michael's stomach sank. There was nothing friendly in that gaze. From the second car, two women stepped out. The older one was elegant, dressed in designer clothes, her jewelry catching the morning light. Her expression was a mix of distress and determination. The younger woman, barely out of her teens, looked overwhelmed by her surroundings. Her wide eyes darted nervously until they landed on Michael and Shadow, and then, strangely, stayed there. Finally, another imposing man exited the second car, taking up a protective position beside the women. Bodyguards, Michael realized. Whoever these people were, they had come prepared. Michael's mouth went dry. What could these people possibly want with him? The well-dressed man, clearly the leader, stepped forward, his cold gaze locking onto Michael. "You there," he called out, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "With the dog, come here." Michael froze. Every instinct screamed at him to turn and run, but where would he go? He was exhausted, and Shadow couldn't move fast enough with his injured leg. There was no escape in this. Slowly, Michael stood, placing a protective hand on Shadow's head. The dog pressed against his leg, a low growl rumbling deep in his throat. "Easy, boy," Michael murmured, though he didn't feel calm himself. They approached cautiously, every pair of eyes on the street following their slow, tense steps. As they drew closer, the rich man took an exaggerated step back, as if the mere presence of Michael might stain him. "That's far enough," the man snapped, holding up a hand. Up close, Michael could see the fury barely contained in the man's eyes. Whatever brought them here wasn't good. The older woman placed a hand on the man's arm. "Robert," she whispered, her voice tight, "don't jump to conclusions." "Caroline," the man, Robert, shrugged her off. "I know what I'm doing." Michael cleared his throat, trying to keep his voice even. "Sir, is there something I can help you with?" Robert's eyes narrowed. "Don't play dumb with me," he snarled. "You know exactly why we're here." Confusion swept through Michael. He had no idea what this man was talking about, but the way Robert's jaw clenched told him any denial would only make things worse. Before Michael could speak, the younger woman, her name, Michael would later learn, was Isabella, stepped forward. Her gaze was fixed on Shadow. There was something in her expression, recognition, mixed with hope. "Emily, wait," Caroline hissed, pulling her back. "Let your father handle this." Robert didn't break his stare. "Where did you get that dog?" Michael blinked. I found him a few weeks ago. He was injured, starving. I've been taking care of him." Robert laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Taking care of him? Look at you. You can't take care of yourself." The words stung more than Michael wanted to admit, but he stayed silent. Robert sneered. "Emily, come here. Tell me, is that Rex?" The young woman hesitated, then stepped forward slowly. Shadow's growl faded as she approached, replaced by a soft whine. His tail wagged hesitantly. Emily dropped to her knees, tears filling her eyes. "Rex," she whispered, "is that really you?" Shadow's response was immediate. He limped forward, tail wagging furiously. He let out a soft bark and nuzzled against Emily's hands. "It is him," Emily sobbed. "Dad, it's Rex." Michael felt his world tilt. Shadow, Rex, looked keen at him, confusion and longing in his brown eyes. Michael's heart broke. I don't understand," Michael whispered. "I found him. He was alone." "You expect us to believe that?" Robert snapped. "That our purebred dog just wandered into an alley and you just happened to find him?" "Sir, I swear—" "Save it," Robert growled. "We were robbed last night. Jewelry, cash, and Rex. And now, here you are, pretending he's yours." Michael reeled. No, I didn't. I would never." "Emily, get Rex. We're done here." Emily looked at Michael, her face torn. But in the end, she obeyed. Gently, she took hold of Rex's collar. The dog looked back at Michael, whining, pulling slightly against Emily's grip. "Please," Michael choked out, "just let me say goodbye." Robert's face twisted in disgust. "Goodbye? You think you deserve that? Be thankful we don't have you arrested." Michael stood frozen as Emily led Rex away. The dog strained toward him until the last second, when he was finally pulled into the car. Michael stood there, hollow, as the doors slammed shut and the convoy pulled away. The street was silent as Michael slowly sank to his knees. The only thing he could hear was the sound of his own breathing and the fading echo of Rex's last whine. For the first time in years, Michael buried his face in his hands and wept. The days that followed Rex's departure were some of the darkest Michael Harper had known since losing his family. The absence of the dog's quiet companionship left a gaping hole in his heart, one that no amount of sleep or scavenging could fill. The city felt colder, harsher, as if the brief glimpse of hope Rex had given him had made the world's cruelty even more unbearable in comparison. Michael tried to return to his routine, but every alley reminded him of the night he found Shadow, Rex, and every meal, however small, felt tasteless without those expectant brown eyes watching him. Even the act of searching dumpsters felt empty. Where before he had checked for scraps Shadow could eat, now there was no reason to care. He went through the motions, but his heart wasn't in it. Word of the confrontation with the wealthy family spread fast. Michael noticed it in the way people looked at him, no longer just indifferent but hostile, suspicious. The other homeless men and women, once silently tolerant of his presence, now kept their distance. He heard whispers behind his back, fragments of cruel gossip. That's him, the one who stole from those rich folks, brought the heat down on all of us. Idiot. Getting involved with their kind. The police presence in the area increased just as Michael feared. Patrol cars crawled the streets, officers stopping and questioning anyone they deemed suspicious, which always seemed to include Michael. It became harder to find safe places to beg or sleep. Even the store owners, who once tolerated him, now watched him like a hawk or shooed him away before he could even ask for help. One night, as Michael huddled in his usual alley, trying to find what little warmth he could, a group of rough-looking men appeared from the shadows. He recognized them, other homeless men from nearby, but their faces were twisted with anger and desperation. "You've caused us nothing but trouble, Harper," the leader growled. "The cops are everywhere now because of you." Michael tried to stand, hands raised in defense. "I didn't do anything," he said, voice hoarse. "They took him. I didn't steal." A fist crashed into his side, cutting off his words. Michael gasped, stumbling back, but they were on him. Kicking, punching, cursing him for the attention he'd brought. He curled into a ball, arms covering his head, but it did little good. When it was over, they vanished as quickly as they'd appeared, disappearing into the night. Michael lay trembling, blood dripping from his lip, his ribs aching. Worse than the pain was the realization that they'd taken what little he had left, his blanket, his small stash of food, and the battered notebook that held the last photograph of Anna, Victor, and Leona. For a long time, Michael didn't move. The photograph had been his anchor, the only piece of his family he had left. Now it was gone, stolen like everything else he'd ever loved. He pulled himself up eventually, leaning heavily against the alley wall. His body hurt, but it was the hollowness in his chest that threatened to swallow him whole. The street lights above flickered as he staggered into the darkness, nowhere to go, no one left to care. After that night, Michael became a ghost in his own city. He avoided the places he used to frequent, venturing further out, always watching his back. Food became harder to find. Sleep became rare. The days and nights blurred together, a haze of exhaustion and pain. And always, his thoughts returned to Rex. Was the dog safe? Warm? Did he miss Michael the way Michael missed him? He knew he shouldn't think about it. What was the point? But he couldn't stop. The memories haunted him. Every moment they'd shared now a cruel reminder of what he'd lost. About a week after losing Rex, on a bitterly cold night, Michael found himself huddled in the doorway of an abandoned building. He hadn't eaten in days. His hands trembled, not just from the cold, but from the growing pull of old habits. Across the street, the neon sign of a liquor store flickered weakly. Michael stared at it, his throat dry, his body aching for the burn of alcohol. He had stayed away for weeks, fighting the urge for shadow, for Rex. But now, with nothing left, what was the point? "I promised," he whispered to no one, his voice cracking. "I promised I'd stay clean. For him." But the promise felt empty now. Rex was gone. There was no one left to care. With shaking legs, Michael forced himself up and crossed the street. The harsh fluorescent lights inside made him squint. He shuffled to the back, where the cheapest liquor was kept, aware of the clerk's eyes following him the entire way. His fingers brushed over a bottle when a familiar voice called out, "Michael? Michael Harper?" Michael turned, startled, to see Machan, the owner of the small grocery store where Michael used to scavenge for bruised fruit. The old man approached slowly, concern etched in his features. "I heard what happened," Mr. Chen said softly, "with the dog and those people. I'm sorry, my friend." Michael's throat tightened, unable to speak. Mr. Chen gently took the bottle from Michael's hand and placed it back on the shelf. "My wife made soup, too much as always. Why don't you come eat? It's hot, much better than this." For a moment, Michael wavered. The offer of warmth, of kindness, it was almost too much. But then he remembered Rex's face as they dragged him away, and the humiliation that came after. He shook his head, his voice barely a whisper. "I can't. Thank you, but I can't." Mr. Chen sighed, but nodded, understanding. "Take care of yourself, Michael. Please." Michael paid for the bottle with what little change he had left, avoiding Mr. Chen's gaze as he left the store. He didn't stop walking until he found another alley, another shadow to disappear into. Sitting with his back against the wall, Michael stared at the bottle in his hands. "I'm sorry, boy," he whispered to the empty space beside him. "I tried. I really tried." The first swallow burned, but it numbed the pain, just like he remembered. For the first time since losing Rex, the ache in his chest dulled. He took another swig, and another. The days that followed were a blur. Michael drank more, begged less. People avoided him completely now, their eyes sliding past him as if he didn't exist. He became thinner, weaker, his body wasting away as his will to live drained from him. Every night, he dreamed of Rex, running, barking, chasing sticks in some sunlit field Michael couldn't reach. And every morning, he woke up colder, more broken. Weeks passed. Michael no longer knew how many. He stopped counting. There was only hunger, cold, and the bottle. It was in this state, drunk, disheveled, and barely clinging to life, that fate found him again. He was slumped in a doorway, eyes half closed, when a familiar voice called out, "Caroline! Emily! Over here! I found him!" Michael forced his eyes open, blinking against the sunlight. And there, standing in front of him, was Robert Mitchell. But this time, his face was pale, his eyes wide with something Michael hadn't expected: shock and regret. Before Michael could speak, he saw them: Caroline, Emily, and between them, straining at the leash, was Rex. The dog let out a bark, tail wagging furiously. And then, before anyone could stop him, Rex broke free and charged straight toward Michael. Michael didn't have the strength to move. He sat there as Rex reached him, licking his face, whining, pressing close like he was trying to climb into Michael's lap. "I'm so sorry," Robert choked out. "We were wrong. So wrong." Michael barely heard him. He was too busy holding on to Rex, burying his face in the dog's fur, sobbing as the weight of everything threatened to crush him. Robert continued, his voice thick. "The real thief was caught. He confessed to everything. We've been looking for you ever since." But Michael couldn't speak. He could only hold Rex, feeling, for the first time in weeks, a spark of warmth deep in his chest. Rex was here, alive, safe, and somehow, maybe, so was Michael. The cold air bit at Michael Harper's skin as he knelt in the doorway, arms wrapped tightly around Rex. The dog whimpered softly, tail thumping against the concrete, oblivious to the small crowd gathering around them. For the first time in what felt like forever, Michael allowed himself to cry. Not the silent tears he had shed alone in the dark, but deep, racking sobs that left him trembling. Rex licked his face, trying to comfort him, just as he had in their time together on the streets. Robert Mitchell stood frozen a few steps away, guilt carved deep into his features. Caroline hovered nearby, her hand clutched over her mouth, while Emily wiped at the tears streaming down her face. "We've been looking for you," Robert said finally, his voice thick with remorse. "Ever since we found out the truth." Michael didn't answer. He couldn't. His entire world had narrowed down to the weight of Rex's body against him, the steady thump of that wagging tail, the warm, damp breath on his cheek. Robert stepped forward cautiously. "The man who broke into our home. He was caught, confessed to everything, said he left the back door open, and that Rex ran off in the chaos." Robert's voice cracked. "You weren't lying. You really did find him." Michael finally lifted his head, bloodshot eyes meeting Robert's. "I told you," he rasped. "I told you I didn't. I would never." "I know." Robert swallowed hard. "I know that now. And I can't tell you how sorry I am for what we did to you, for what I said." Michael sat back, wiping his face roughly with shaken hands. You took everything I had left." His voice broke as he looked at Rex. "I had nothing, then I had him, and then nothing again." Emily knelt beside him, reaching out slowly until her hand rested on Rex's back. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "We were wrong, all of us." She bit her lip and added, "Rex wouldn't stop whining after we left, wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep. We knew we had to find you." Michael glanced at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. He looked back at Robert, struggling to believe what he was hearing. Why are you really here?" Robert took a deep breath. "Because we need to make this right, or try to." He hesitated before continuing. "We want to offer you a job, Michael, a real one. You'd be working with us, with the animals, on our property." Michael blinked, the words not sinking in. "A job?" "Yes." Caroline stepped forward now, her voice soft. "We've got land. A lot of it. Gardens, stables. It's too much for us. You'd live there, in the guest house, take care of the animals, be with Rex." Emily's eyes lit up. "You'd be close to him every day." Michael stared at them, struggling to process it all. A job, a home, a chance to be with Rex again. It sounded like a cruel dream, the kind that fades the moment you reach for it. Robert cleared his throat, uncomfortable but determined. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't expect it. What we did, it was unforgivable. But I can't walk away knowing what I've done. Let us try to help. Let us give you this chance. Please." For a long moment, Michael sat in silence. The wind whipped around them, the city continuing to move past as if none of it mattered. He looked down at Rex, who gazed up at him with those familiar, trusting eyes. Michael thought about the cold nights, the hunger, the endless loneliness, about what it had felt like to lose everything, twice. His voice shook when he finally spoke. I don't know if I can do this. I'm not the man I used to be." "We know," Caroline said gently, "but you don't have to be. Just come with us. See it. If you hate it, we'll drive you back. No questions asked." Michael looked at Rex again. The dog barked softly, nudging at his hand as if urging him forward. With a deep, shuddering breath, Michael nodded. "All right. I'll come. For him." Relief washed over all three of them. Robert extended a hand, and after a long hesitation, Michael took it. The grip was firm, full of unspoken promises. The ride back to the Mitchells' estate was surreal. Michael sat in the back of the Mercedes, Rex's head resting on his lap, while Emily occasionally turned to check if he was okay. No one spoke much, the silence thick with everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. The estate was larger than anything Michael had imagined. Acres of land, sprawling gardens, stables filled with horses, and a large guest house that looked bigger than any home he'd ever known. He felt painfully out of place, his worn clothes and gaunt frame a sharp contrast to the pristine surroundings. Still, Rex bounded ahead happily, tail wagging as he explored familiar ground. For the first time, Michael allowed himself to smile. Robert gave him a tour, pointing out the tasks he'd be responsible for, feeding the animals, maintaining the gardens, light repairs around the property. "I heard you were a carpenter," Robert said carefully. "We've got a workshop, tools. You'd be free to use them." The offer felt genuine, and for the first time, Michael felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years: pride. I used to be good with my hands," he murmured. Caroline showed him the guest house, a cozy two-bedroom cottage with running water, heat, and a fully stocked kitchen. "It's yours," she said simply, "for as long as you want it." Michael couldn't speak. He wandered through the small home, his hands running over the clean counters, the warm blankets on the bed. Tears blurred his vision, and he quickly wiped them away before anyone could see. The first few days were hard. Michael struggled to adjust to sleeping in a real bed, to waking up warm and safe. The urge to run, to flee back to the streets where he knew how to survive, gnawed at him constantly. The temptation of the bottle was worse. Every time he passed a liquor store, the craving clawed at him. But then he'd see Rex, waiting patiently by his side, and he'd remember the promise he'd made. Slowly, he fell into a routine. Mornings were spent tending to the animals, afternoons working in the garden or helping Robert with repairs. Evenings, he'd sit on the porch, Rex's head on his lap, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Emily visited often, eager to learn about his past, about his skills. She listened when he spoke of Anna, Victor, and Leona, never judging, just listening. It was a gift he hadn't known he needed. Weeks turned into months. Michael grew stronger. The hollows in his cheeks filled out, His eyes lost their haunted look. He found solace in the simple work, pride in seeing the garden bloom under his care, and fixing a broken fence, or carving a piece of wood into something beautiful. One night, as they sat around the dinner table, something Michael never thought he'd do again, Robert raised his glass. "To second chances," he said simply. "For all of us." Michael met his eyes, understanding passing between them. "To second chances," he echoed. As the night wore on, Michael sat on the porch with Rex beside him, looking up at the stars. For the first time in years, he felt at peace, not whole. He would never be whole again, but healing. "We made it, boy," he whispered, scratching Rex behind the ears. "We really made it." The months passed quietly, each day folding into the next like pages in a new chapter of Michael Harper's life, one he had never dared to imagine. With every sunrise over the Mitchell estate, the weight of his old life seemed to loosen its grip, and slowly, carefully, Michael allowed himself to believe in the second chance he'd been given. Life on the estate became routine, but never dull. Michael threw himself into his work, tending to the animals with care, his calloused hands becoming steady and strong again. The gardens flourished under his watchful eye, each new bloom a quiet testament to his progress. The carpentry shed became his sanctuary, filled once more with the comforting scent of sawdust and wood, the sound of tools creating instead of destroying. Rex was his constant shadow. The dog rarely left his side, tail wagging, eyes bright with contentment. It was clear to everyone that whatever wounds the streets had left on both man and dog were healing together. Rex had regained his strength, his limp barely noticeable now as he ran across the fields, chasing after sticks and rabbits with the energy of a pup. The Mitchells stayed true to their word. Robert, once cold and guarded, made efforts to include Michael in family discussions and decisions about the property. He sought out Michael's opinion on repairs, asked for his advice on projects, and listened when Michael spoke. There were still awkward moments, unspoken memories of that first cruel meeting between them. But slowly, trust began to grow. Caroline proved kinder than Michael had expected. She often brought over homemade meals, claiming she'd made too much, but Michael knew it was her way of looking after him. She shared stories of her own childhood, her fears and regrets, and over time their conversations became easy, natural. But it was Emily who truly broke through Michael's walls. She visited daily, her youthful curiosity and genuine kindness impossible to resist. She asked questions about his family, his carpentry, his life before the streets, not out of pity, but out of a desire to understand. Michael found himself telling her things he hadn't spoken aloud in years. He told her about Anna's laugh, about Victor's love for basketball, about Leona's dreams of becoming a doctor. Emily listened, sometimes crying, sometimes smiling, always reaching out to squeeze his hand when his voice trembled. "You should tell their story," Emily said one evening as they sat on the porch, Rex sprawled between them. "They deserve to be remembered." Michael stared at the setting sun, the sky streaked with orange and pink. "I don't know if I can," he admitted. "It still hurts." "I think that's why you should," she whispered. "So it hurts less." The words stayed with Michael, echoing in his mind long after Emily had gone inside. That night, he pulled out a new notebook, one Robert had quietly left for him in the workshop, and began to write. Slowly, painfully, but he wrote. About the life he had lost, about the family he still loved, about the man he had become, and the dog that had saved him. As winter turned to spring, Michael felt something inside him shift. He no longer flinched at his own reflection. He no longer woke in the middle of the night, heart pounding with fear. The pull of the bottle, once so strong, began to fade. Every time the craving surfaced, he looked at Rex, felt the dog's steady gaze on him, and found the strength to resist. One bright morning, Robert approached him while he was repairing a broken fence post. "Michael," he began, clearing his throat, "there's something I'd like to ask." Michael straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans. "What's that?" Robert hesitated. "Emily, she's going off to college soon. She's been talking about studying veterinary science because of Rex, because of you." He smiled faintly. "I was wondering, when she comes home on weekends, maybe you could keep teaching her about the animals, about your work." Michael blinked, caught off guard. You want me to teach her?" Robert nodded. "You've taught her more in these few months than I ever have. I see the way she looks up to you." He extended a hand. "You're family now, Michael, if you want to be." Michael stared at the outstretched hand, his throat tightening. Slowly, he took it, gripping it firmly. "I'd be honored," he managed. From that day on, something changed. Michael no longer felt like a guest, a stranger passing through. He belonged here. The estate wasn't just a place to sleep, it was home. The days grew longer, the sun warmer, and the world seemed full of color again. Michael and Rex spent their afternoons walking the property, sometimes with Emily, sometimes just the two of them. They watched the gardens bloom, the animals grow, the seasons change. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sky turn to gold, Michael spoke softly, his voice steady. "You saved me, Rex. More than once." The dog wagged his tail, resting his head on Michael's knee. "I thought I was done, that there was no coming back. But you brought me back." Inside, laughter drifted from the house. Emily, Caroline, Robert. Michael smiled, a deep, genuine smile that reached his eyes. He had never imagined this kind of peace was possible again. He reached down, scratching behind Rex's ears. "We made it, boy," he whispered. "We really made it home." The stars began to appear overhead, twinkling against the darkening sky. Michael sat back, feeling the weight of the past lift just a little more. He wasn't the man he used to be, and he never would be. But here, in this place, surrounded by people who cared, he had found something new, a second chance, a family. And for the first time in years, Michael Harper dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, he deserved it. What would you do if life threw you into a situation like this? Could you find the strength to keep going? Tell us your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to share where you're watching from. We love seeing viewers from all over the world. Smash that like button and subscribe for more emotional stories like this one.